Good morning. Is it morning?
No, it's afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Evelyn Mazak, co-moderator of the Community of Hope, and this is Sarah Cannon, the president of Advent, and today we're going to be co-moderating the MCC Annual Meeting. So I would like to start out with reading the land acknowledgement. The land where we gather today, Tijop, is part of the homeland of the Ho-Chunk people. The Christian church was complicit in the forcible removal of indigenous people through the doctrine of discovery from 1452, further adopted by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1823 in Johnson versus McIntosh. We renounce this history, humbly lament all harm done, and honor the presence and persistence of the Ho-Chunk. We commit to reparative actions, including caring for the prairies, gardens, woods, and water of this land. If we could have the opening prayer, Nick.
In the Advent meeting, I just kept reading the same hymn words as a prayer over and over, so I switched it up and found these words from the UCC hymnal. Let us pray. Called as partners in Christ's service, called to ministries of grace, we respond with deep commitment, fresh new lines of faith to trace. May we learn the art of sharing, side by side and friend with friend, equal partners in our caring to fulfill God's chosen end. Christ's example, Christ's inspiring, Christ's clear call to work and worth, let us follow, never faltering, reconciling folk on earth. Men and women, richer, poorer, all God's people, young and old, blending human skills together, gracious gifts from God unfold. Thus, new patterns for Christ's mission in a small or global sense help us bear each other's burdens, breaking down each wall or fence. Words of comfort, words of vision, words of challenge said with care, bring new power and strength for action, make us colleagues, free and fair. Amen.
Before we do anything else, let's have a round of applause for Christy and the rest of the lunch people. Thank you. And also for Kaisa for putting together the tome that some of you actually have in hand. The annual reports. So the first order of business is approval of our agenda today. Can I have a motion for approval of our agenda? Lynn and Sandy. Is there any discussion or additions? All in favor? Any objections? Okay, unanimous approval. Thank you, Ed, for doing the minutes.
Then next on the agenda is the approval of the January 30th, 2022 annual meeting minutes. Can I have a motion for approval of those minutes? Okay. Any discussions or questions? Who seconded? Phil Blado. All of those in favor of approval of those minutes signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
So we move on to the leadership team. The leadership team members this year were Scott Bauer, Evelyn Mazak, Sarah Cannon, Corky Custer, Raylene Freitag, Julie James, Ed Helmer, Ann Ward, Vicki Warren, Tom Matthews, Rob Olson, Rebecca Weesey, Sulia Miller, and Sandy Ezrael. That is all mixed up from our congregations because that's the way we function. It's been great. All mixed up. No. And the people ending their service today are Scott Bauer and me, Sarah Cannon, and Sulia Miller from Advent, and Vicki Warren from Hope. So can we have a round of applause for people's service?
I especially want to thank Sarah for all the work that she's done. She's just been so wonderful to work with, and we will miss her. I will be staying on the Hope Steering Committee, but not as co-moderator. So the new members and community members to the leadership team are Ann Henning, Parker Kolash, Don Tubasing, and Russell Helmer as the Advent Youth Representatives. If you're here, you want to stand up? Yeah, acceptance of the reports? Yeah. Okay. Okay, we don't have to vote on item number 6, which is the acceptance of the MCC reports, the electronic version. Oh, okay. All right, I'll let you. I didn't see that.
I did get new glasses, but it hasn't entirely helped, so. So now we come to the MCC reports as posted in the electronic version, which takes up most of what you've got there in your hands or that you've looked at. So may I have a motion to approve the MCC reports as posted in the electronic version? I so move. Peter? And David Cannon seconds. Any discussion or questions of all of this list here? There just has been so much. I mean, there's always a lot going on in this place for such a small community, but this year seems to have been just particularly lots of joyful service, I should say. Anybody have any questions or want to make comments or no? So all in favor of approval? Any objections? Okay, approval of all the wonderful things we've done, which is good.
Okay, next we move on to the MCC spending plans and funds, and Ed Helmer from the finance chair, he's got a dual hat of taking minutes and also walking us through the spending. Okay, Ed, thank you.
So I bet if Scott Bauer was up here, he could both talk and take notes at the same time. I'm not that talented, so I'm just going to do one of those two things. So I am here on behalf of the Finance Committee, notably John Rao, Linda Pills, Ken Johnson, and Corky Custer, and then the treasurers, Sue Young and Beth Campbell. So for 2022 and 2023, you may know that we had planned budget deficits for those 2 years where our income was going to be less than what we expected to spend. Wasn't by a lot. It was, around 10,000-ish for those 2 years. We knew that wasn't sustainable. So with 2024, Pastor Jen was also interested in the opportunity to work 75% of full-time. And so that presented an opportunity for the MCC to save on personnel costs, which is by far the largest part of our budget. And that really helped considerably in making the numbers match. So we received an early indication from John with his research, talking to the staff and the various groups like the Land Use Umbrella Group and others for 2024 expenses. We expected about a 1% increase in giving was going to be needed to cover those expenses, and that's what we indicated with the stewardship campaign. The congregations either met or exceeded that. Advent came through with between 1% and 2%. You could round it to 2%, as we have in the spending plan, and Community of Hope came through with a 3% increase. So with that, we now have a budget, a balanced budget for 2024, which I think is good news. Overall, you know, many of the line items, if you've read the report, are pretty close to what they were in prior years. And I think at this point, I mean, we have some, if we want to talk about future expenses, right now there's nothing gigantic happening as far as we know in 2024. Coming up maybe a little bit farther down the line, like 2025, we may need to reseal the driveway. 2030-ish, you know, so maybe 6 years down the line, we may need to actually completely replace the parking lot and driveway. You know, the carpet, as we've talked about at various times, has shown its age, so that's a pretty sizable, maybe an $80,000 expense that might be happening, you know, 5 or 6 years down the road. There's another sort of other projects that have not been scheduled, but so nothing too large that we know of or are planning in 2024, but there's some kind of peeking out on the horizon. Does anybody have any questions that I can hope to answer? All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed, for everything that you do. I really appreciate it. Okay, so I'd like a motion for the approval of the MCC spending plans and budget for 2024. Do I have a motion? Sandy Esrael? Do I have a second? Lucetta? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Should I do this? Okay. All right, so moving on to other business, one of the things that we worked on this year was the transition of 75% time for Pastor Jen, which starts tomorrow. So Jen will have Mondays off, and so generally, because of the Friday sabbatical for pastors, she'll be working Tuesdays through Thursdays, but as she said in the Community Hope service today, she will be available for emergencies, pastoral care, and other things she needs to be on Mondays, and you know, she and Nick have a good working relationship. We have actually modified their position descriptions so that it reflects Jen's 75% time, but also reflects that Nick should not be working more than 100% time with an addendum. What we want everybody to know that this is, you know, a year in progress. We're the first time that we've done this. There may be some glitches, but it looks like we're going to be able to do this. And so we just wanted to update people about that. Lynn Breedlove did a reflections of the transition on page 72, and he will talk about that in a minute. But if you have any questions about it, please feel free to let us know. It's a work in progress, but we think it's going to work out just fine. Sarah, you want to do Nick's sabbatical? and then we'll have Lynn come up.
Okay. So one of the things that will impact how things work in this year of in progress is both Jen's approaching parental leave, and also Pastor Nick is taking a sabbatical, which we've been trying to get him to take for a while, so he's taking it. So there will need to be thoughtful discussion in the congregation of how we all chip in to allow them both the leaves, and how we pick up the slack on which things we might need to do and which things we don't need to do as a congregation, as individual congregations, and as the MCC. And I wanted to say that Larry Henning, who may still be online from South Carolina, sent the leadership team a letter talking about how he and his congregation handled it when he had his sabbatical. And it was a really affirming and interesting letter and document. And he has offered to host an education hour or talk to Advent or MCC, whatever we want, to talk to us about how to move forward with having our pastors not available. Like Nick will not be on, and Nick will be hiking the Ice Age Trail. So yeah, I don't think we can call him up in the middle of the day and say, so anyway, did you want to say anything more, Nick? Okay, so.
Okay, so next on other business, Lynn Breedlove did a reflection of 2024 MCC transition.
During the ramp up to the decision for Jen to be 75% time, there was a really interesting and thoughtful exchange, mostly via email, between the Personnel Committee, which I serve on, the Executive Committee, the Search Committee, and the pastors. So once the decision was made, I thought, rather than just sort of lose all of those interesting insights, it might be worth looking back and lifting a few of the main themes. And this is actually, the short collection of those themes is actually in the annual report. I think it's page 72. So I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll just mention a couple. And some of them may seem obvious to you, but I think as we really try to adjust to this new situation this year, we're going to have to be conscious about some of these things. For example, a 1 3/4 team has less hours than a 2.0 team. That means we should expect less work from that team than we would expect from a 2.0 team. And so if some people are thinking, well, can't Nick and Jen just kind of run maybe 10 miles an hour faster and get everything done that they always did? No, we're not asking them to do that. And so some of those tasks that the pastors did, or maybe sometimes both pastors did together, maybe some of those tasks are going to be one pastor doing it rather than a 2-pastor team at all points in time. And some of that means some of the rest of us are going to have to pick up some of the slack. So part of this year, I think, is going to be kind of noticing, well, which things really are too much on the plates of the pastors, and can some of the rest of us take up some of that? That's one thing. And as Evelyn referred to, we got to make sure that 3/4 for Jen really means 3/4. She's getting paid less than she would get paid at 1.0 full-time. So she's very conscientious. We don't want that to mean she's going to work beyond the hours she's actually being paid. And she's already started off being clear about what office hours she's going to have. But I think that's going to be important for all of us to keep in mind. And I think HOPE members in particular, we're going to have to adjust our expectations of having a HOPE pastor who's at 3/4 time. The other thing is, people were saying, well, we don't exactly know how this is going to work, and so this year is going to be sort of a learning year. And as the pastors are learning how to split up the work, the rest of us, if we have observations or insights or concerns about how this transition is going or not going as well as we hoped, leadership and pastors really want to hear from the members. If you have a concern about, oh, this transition isn't working out for me the way I hoped it would, let people know so maybe adjustments can be made. And one of the things in the Road Ahead review was the recommendation that there be a very conscious discussion of shared workload between the pastors. And there's actually going to be a format and a process where the pastors and the executive committee talk that through. Obviously, clarifying shared workload in light of the new configuration of the team, that's going to be a really important discussion this year. So I'll leave it at that. If you want to read the other reflections, they're in the annual report.
So the next item on the agenda is the Road Ahead Review Implementation Update. And I know we've had a education hour about it, and certainly the leadership team has had a lot of information from the team, but I thought if Raylene doesn't mind coming up and giving us just a quick update about what has happened this year and what is to be expected this coming year, because it's been a lot of work.
Good morning or good afternoon. The report that is in the annual report, I encourage you to take a look at that. There's not only a description of the work that's been done, but there are links to a lot of the documents that have been created during the course of the year, so that if you want to read in depth about any of the things we've been working on, it's all there. So I will just briefly mention the areas that we've been working on, and thank the people. I won't name everybody because thankfully there have been a lot of people that have been working on this, but their names are all listed in the report. Most importantly, I think what I want to be sure that we all feel is that when the Road Ahead Review was first commissioned 2 years ago, it felt very different here than it does today. And we were still in the middle of a pandemic. Pastor Sonia had just left. There's a lot of questioning about, so where are we going? And through this process over the last 2 years, between the assessment and then the recommendation phase, I've just felt this place it's like spring again. I don't know if others have felt it, but I want to thank everyone for just being part of just creating such a strong sense of community here and continuing to focus on the fact that we're a community here to do God's work and paying attention to that. And in particular, I really want to thank Pastor Jen and Pastor Nick, who have done so much in the last 2 years in the spirit of the Road Ahead Review recommendations, that it just feels like this is a joyful place to be to me. So with that, just give you a brief idea of a couple of things that we've been working on, and I want to talk about what's left, so that if you haven't had a chance to get involved with this stuff yet, that maybe there's something that will catch your imagination. You'll approach one of us and say, I'd like to be involved in that this year. So Lynn and Dan and I are still on the implementation committee. Nancy Tubising had been on it for a while and helped us tremendously in the beginning. And so we're the 3 people that you could come to. So the things that we've worked on, there's been some work in the personnel area. There were a couple of policies that weren't clear or were missing, and in particular, we're making sure that there will be an annual review for the pastors, and you can click on the link in there to hear the beautiful ways that that's been thought about to make that not just a perfunctory thing that happens once a year, but to be part of our growth as a community. There's a question about, well, what happens if there is a concern about something personnel-wise? And we realized that there wasn't ever anything to tell us what we were supposed to do in those situations. So the team led by Lynn has worked on that. And they're going through the whole personnel policy manual to make sure that it's all up to date. So things like that you might never even know needed to be done, but they're done. There's a whole group of work around pastor supports. The sabbatical is one thing, but also there's pastoral coaching that happens and some form of individual pastor support. In Advent, it's a mutual ministry team. Pastor Jen has a different approach. And so you can read the document if you're really interested in it, but what's really important is that we as a congregation understand that we've called pastors to serve us. We also need to be in service to them. And so we wanted to be sure that that was intentional and very clear. One that I want to be sure that you all know about is the idea that we're going to start having something in the form of some kind of lay ministry. And what a group of us did was come together and make some general recommendations for how that will go. And then now there'll be a smaller group. Pastor Jen and Phil Blado will continue. And we're actually looking for someone from Advent to be on the steering team to come up with just the real framework. So we know generally that this is going to be peers. Any one of us can become a potential term we're looking at is befrienders. And it's for us to serve one another when one of us is going through a particularly difficult time. To have somebody you can call to sit with you, not to solve the problem, not to be just information and resources, but to sit with you as a spiritual friend. And go forward with that. So that'll be particularly important, as Lynn was mentioning, that it'll be important for us with 1.75 pastors instead of 2-point pastors. Our needs for pastoral care aren't going to necessarily go down, so let's be there for one another. There are a couple of things that happened regarding adult ed and worship, and what happened there was just sharing your thoughts with those committees. When we did the survey almost 2 years ago now, you all wrote such beautiful narrative with brilliant ideas and feedback in the areas of worship and adult education, and we wanted to be sure that those teams had the things that you wrote. So we collated that information and shared it with them. There's a finance study team that Dan is leading, and what's important to know about that is that in the near future, watch for a short survey that this team has been really looking at. What's the connection between our faith and how we understand our partnership and the way we structure our finances? And so we just want to hear from everybody around that. There's a group working on governance structure. The main things we're looking at there are just to make sure that we have sustainability so that we don't have just complete turnover of the whole executive team in a year and then nobody has any history. So we're looking at building that in. And then also in the various governance documents across the two congregations and the MCC umbrella, over the years, as those have been updated independently, they've grown a little bit so that there's some areas of inconsistency and some areas of where something may not be said clearly or may not be said at all. And so we're looking to just make sure that that'll be clear. There is a value statement and ecumenical statement work being done. That's in the MCC governance documents, and we're just taking a quick look to see, based on the surveys that we wrote and what everybody said was important to us as a community, not everything was really reflected in those value statements. So some small changes to maybe incorporate that. Now, that's all happening. What we'll be tackling in this next year will be youth ministry. So we've been kind of waiting for the Children and Families Minister position to be filled, so we see how that all fits together. But I want to encourage you, if this is something that is of interest or importance to you, talk to Dan, because he'll be looking for folks to weigh in on that. We'll be looking at starting a group around relationship building. It's kind of happened organically, and so maybe we don't even need to do this, but what we want to be sure is that we're doing everything we can to make sure that building relationships with one another continues into the future. So we don't know what that's going to look like, but if you're interested in how do we relate with one another, let us know. There'll be one on conflict resolution. In any organization, there's going to be conflict from time to time. There is actually, we found this out, I didn't know it, but there actually is a beautifully written conflict resolution policy. But what we need to look at is, well, most of us didn't even know it was there, and there wasn't anything structurally to trigger its use. And so what do we need to do to make sure that together that we make a commitment to one another, not just to smile but try to hide things under the rug when there's conflict, but to have honest conversations with one another and reach resolution. And finally, there's a conversation happening on fair versus equal. You notice that we have two congregations. When there were two full-time pastors, that was pretty easy to understand. But when there's one that has a full-time and one that has a part-time, when one congregation is bigger and one is smaller, how do we work together in those ways so that it feels fair to everyone? And so how do we approach that? So there will be some conversation about that, and if that's an intriguing concept to you, how do we have this marriage between two congregations? Let us know. Are there any questions about what's happening or what's going to happen? I'll encourage you to click on links. There's a lot of documentation in there to go much deeper into any of these areas that sound interesting. Thank you.
So with that, just a quick thank you to the RARI team that's been working, Lynn Breedlove, Raylene Freitag, Dan Streit, Nancy Tupasing for her work previously, and for all of you who have joined in on these various things that Raylene has outlined and given your time and thought to those committees. Thank you very much for that.
And now I'm going to ask Rebecca to come up here and talk about the land acknowledgement that you heard read this morning and that is on the cover of the report. She's been part of the team that has worked on that. That's Rebecca and Joanne Kirkland, Sarah Key, David Dahl, Aaron Redd, Lisa Johnson, Martha Frey, Mary Bowman, Pastor Nick, Pastor Jen, Emily Wixon, and Sonia Keseyberg. That's a lot of people working on something that's really important, and Rebecca's going to talk about it.
Sarah and Evelyn asked me to give you a quick background, and I see on the agenda it says vote on there. So I don't know, I'm hoping you guys accept it. The task force really began pre-pandemic, late 2019, I think it was, and there are a bunch of founding members that I see in this room. So it took over 4 years to come up with the statement that you have seen on the front of this report and that you've heard occasionally in services. Sonia Kesey-Berg began the task force when she was curious about this land and how did we end up having it. And that led her toward the consideration of the First Nations Task Force along with her husband, David Kesey-Berg. The actual language really did take us 4 years to come up with. It was very difficult, it was somewhat tortured, and finally at the end this fall, we had to break it down with just 4 people hammering out in multiple gatherings to come up with the final language that was approved by the task force. Those 4 people were Martha Fry, Pastor Nick, Pastor Jen, and me. The task force approved the language. We took it to the Ho-Chunk Nation. The Ho-Chunk Nation approved the statement that you've seen. They want to be kept in the loop about when we do a dedication so that the Ho-Chunk president and hopefully other members of the Ho-Chunk Nation can come down for a dedication for the land acknowledgement. When we figure out when we're going to be able to roll it out, I don't know if we'll be able to get it on the stone boulders that we're looking at by this spring or what the timeline is. So, then after the Ho-Chunk Nation gave us approval to the task force, the leadership team for the MCC approved the language that you see in the statement, and that's where we are today. Does anyone have any questions?
Appreciate the last sentence. We commit to reparative actions, including caring for the prairies, gardens, woods, and waters of this land. The question is, what other reparative actions could we be taking? And that would be the key issue. I think we as an MCC really need to think about, grapple with, because it's not just a matter of taking care of this land, but having some kind of a relationship with the whole chunk people that goes beyond asking them to approve our statement.
The question is essentially what further actions would be included in the final line of the statement. We commit to reparative actions, including caring for the prairies, gardens, woods, and waters of this land. That is a continuing question that the First Nations Task Force, even though the task of the statement is done, the task force will continue to address that question. There have been other suggestions with regard to scholarships or joining in with other churches in funding scholarships or other things for the Ho-Chunk Nation. So that is ongoing. It may end up with a partnership with other churches for those considerations. So stay tuned. I'm sure you'll get updates from the task force as we go forward.
In addition In addition to, you were referring to something on the grounds. Did the task force consider anything inside the building that would be sort of a regular reminder to all of us and also a message to new people who come after this statement's been affirmed? Because I think about some of the other policies like open and affirming in the UCC, and I always wondered, well, there was a lot of talk about that when it was adopted, but what about people who come later who weren't there then? Like, how do they even know about it, and how can they kind of affirm it themselves?
Well, I can tell you that, well, for one, there are cards with the land acknowledgement at the Welcome Center. It appears on the website. There have been suggestions in the task force as well as in leadership with regard to considering an indoor plaque or something in a prominent place where people will be able to see it in addition to the statement on the grounds in a permanent fashion carved into boulders.
Thanks.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
So as you heard, the leadership team has already voted approval of this, but I thought it's important for the entire congregation to also vote. I think it's important. So may I have a motion? Who was that? Howard Konetsky and Karen Schwartz. All in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you, and thank you, Rebecca and the task force, for all the work over the years. And then the final thing is just an update on the Children and Family Ministry position. As you all know, that's been an interim position, and the pastors and member of the Personnel Committee have been interviewing candidates, and hopefully the process will be done soon so that there's an announcement, but then that would be go from an interim position to a settled part-time position here at the MCC. Oh, okay.
So the core team for the hiring was Pastor Jen, Pastor Nick, and me. I'm the representative from the Personnel Committee. We posted the position in early November. We had the benefit of quite a long process of visioning for the future of the Children's Family Ministry to sort of inform our posting and a revised job description for this position. Besides the core team that I mentioned, we also had some very valuable help from Anna Henning and Krista Olson at various points along the way. And some of you should know, Anna and Krista are two of a handful of moms who have been very steadfast supporters of the Children and Family Ministry and participate in these visioning sessions and sort of keep the drumbeat going, which isn't maybe visible to the whole MCC, but to some of us it is. 15 people applied for the job, which we thought was good news. We weren't sure, part-time job, how much interest there would be, so we felt like we had a good batch of applicants. Interestingly, when we asked people, why did you apply for this job? What interests you? There were two themes that came up quite a bit. One was, I'm very interested in this ecumenical partnership thing that you guys have. And some other people said, you know, based on looking at your website, this looks like a really progressive congregation, like the kind of projects that you work on. Like this seems like the kind of church I want to be associated with. So I thought that was interesting. Those are two magnetic forces, I guess, that brought in some applicants. We interviewed 5 people who we felt were all people with really good qualifications. We had hoped to complete the process by early January. It took longer than we expected. Some people, we did a second interview, but also the holidays, it was really hard to get everybody on the calendar for interviews, so we lost a little time there. Sarah Key's interim contract was actually set to end today, but she graciously agreed to extend that a month to February 25th to give us time to complete the search. As they said, we're very close to the end now. Nick and Jen and I are planning to meet this week. We hope to make an announcement very soon. We will have to get, confirmation from the executive committee on our choice, but we expect that to be forthcoming. So stay posted. I'm hoping within a week or so we'll have something that'll go out to everybody saying the results of the search.
Does anyone have any questions? No? I wanted to, I don't see Sarah Key here, but I wanted to thank her for her service as interim, particularly because it keeps getting extended, which is not necessarily an easy thing to work with. So Raylene already talked about the lay ministry pilot, so if you have any questions about that, contact her. Is there any other business that anyone wishes to raise? No? So before we ask Pastor Jen to come up for a closing prayer, I wanted to read something from Sandy Ezrail, the co-moderator of Community of Hope, that she put in the October meeting minutes for the leadership team on an occasion when we didn't have Scott, our normal person. And she said, as the recorder for this October meeting, I noted that throughout the meeting, people commented on the energy of the MCC, the positive feedback people are sharing with each other, and the recognition for each other of all the ongoing work. We are in a good place, friends. So thank you all for that.
Thank you, everybody. Now Jen will do a closing prayer.
All right, let us pray. Holy God, you are our rock and our Redeemer and the fountain of life. You are the fountain that gives life to each of us and to this congregation and to all the work that we do in our daily lives and together as a church. For this, we are eternally grateful. We ask that you be with us in this new year, in this winter season, in this time of change and transition which comes with unknowns and possibilities. God, be with us. And be with those in our community today who are without warmth or without food, without certainty, without a home. May we never forget that our mission as a community and as a church is not just to give glory to you, God, but also to serve our community and those who are going through tough times. God, we are grateful that you inspire us each day and that you shower us with your unending forgiveness and love. May we feel blessed as we go out into our weeks. Amen.
Do I have a motion for adjournment? A second? All those in favor of adjourning? Signify. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.